I found an old recording of the most gruesome TV show ever broadcast. Me and Lyla always carve dozens of jack-o'-lanterns every October, so they'd absolutely saturate our lawn on Halloween night. It was our thing. But looking back on it, now that I've lost her, I just feel bad for the pumpkins. I almost relate to them somehow. The way they were carved up, had everything of substance inside of them torn out, and left as hollow, rotting shells with forced smiles. Needless to say, I didn't cope with her death well. I didn't want to cope with it. I wanted the world to drown in the black sludge of my grief. I loathed the people I saw going about their lives, unaware that the world had already ended the moment Lyla died. The earth shouldn't keep spinning. Life shouldn't go on. Not without her. Even my relatives bringing me along on a trip to Kauai only made it worse. The most gorgeous place on earth. And it made me sick with hatred. Nothing that beautiful deserved to exist if Lyla wasn't ever going to get to see it. It wasn't fair. I thought I'd never enjoy or care about anything again. Then I discovered media preservation. It started with taking some of Lyla's old VHS tapes to a video repair place to fix some issues with the footage before it's digitized. The job fascinated me. In a universe based on entropy, where everything inevitably fades away and is forgotten, restoring something lost is like snatching it from the jaws of death, right? Like flipping the bird to the universe in its so-called natural order. People die, but information doesn't have to. Now, it doesn't matter how small, be it some god-awful plug-and-play licensed game or a cereal commercial from 80s. It's my mission to recover it in as high quality as I'm able and make sure it's freely available online for as long as possible. A couple weeks ago, I came across a big haul. 4 boxes of old VHS tapes offered up on eBay for dirt cheap. Most of the tapes were just recordings of Cheers episodes already preserved in higher qualities, but one Maxell E240 caught my interest. First of all, I'd never seen one so melted. Sure, sometimes they were left in an attic too long, and the colors and audio start to degrade. But this one looked like it had survived a house fire. It was covered in soot and the smell of smoke, and had the overall shape of a chocolate bar left out in the sun a little too long. Second was the label, which read in neat Sharpie, Episode 4,679,329, March 8th, 2035. The casing was so disfigured, I had to bust it apart just to pull out the tapes and re-spool them in a fresh cassette. I tried to iron out the creases in the tape as best I could, but I had no illusions about it accomplishing much. The mylar surface had been irreparably warped in places by whatever fire had half melted the thing. Imagine my despair at the sight of the dreaded no signal. I could clearly see the tape wasn't blank, yet no amount of adjusting the tracking or trying different TVs or VCRs accomplished anything. Just as I was about to give up, though, the thing just suddenly started playing properly the exact instant the clock struck 3 a.m. As if it had only now decided to work. My all-nighter had paid off. I didn't dwell on the fact that this miracle fix had been impossible. If I'd had any sense, I'd have torn the horrid thing out of my VCR and buried it beneath holy ground. Instead, fool I was, I sat down and watched. At first, the thing seemed unwatchable. The audio was so distorted that the show's theme song emerged as a low, crackling, staticky wail that made my head throb. And the logo was completely indistinguishable through the flickering and interference. I thought it was a lost cause for a moment, but then a figure appeared and cleared away the static, like Moses parting the Red Sea. It was the sight of the show's host that hooked me. He was just perfect. Perfect in every way. I knew it just looking at him. Infinitely handsome and likable and charismatic. And he always said the exact perfect thing. The only issue is, I don't remember a single thing about him now. In the same way you can't remember a dream that seemed so clear to you while you were experiencing it. He just appears in my memory as this abstract blur in a sharp suit. Yet at the time, I was awestruck, even before he said a single word. I can't even remember a word he said. It was like he was speaking another language, one I felt as opposed to heard. I'll try and transcribe it as best as I can into words, but know that it's only a pathetic imitation. For another night of laughs, prizes, and fun for the whole family with your host. I've noticed that the audio and visual distortion seemed to suddenly intensify the instant he said his name, rendering it completely illegible. Idiot I was. I figured that was a coincidence. Tonight is a night of celebration, folks, because thanks to the support of loyal viewers like you, we have just been approved for, get this, 200,000 more seasons! The live studio audience went wild with applause. I put that in scare quotes because, as far as I could tell, besides the host, the studio seemed completely empty, as if he was standing on a plain white stage that extended outwards into infinite darkness on all sides. For those just joining us, the game here is simple. He explained that this was some part of a trivia show. Every time a guest got an answer wrong, it brought them a little closer to some sort of unspecified punishment. And if they got it right, he smirked. Well, they get to delay the inevitable. I wondered what he meant by inevitable. I didn't have to wonder long. The host gestured to a curtain that hadn't been there moments ago, which raised to reveal a middle-aged man. You know the type. Bushy mustache, gray hair, round-rimmed glasses. Kind of guy you'd have doing your plumbing. He couldn't look any more out of place, stood up and restrained in that... What the hell is that? I recognized that metal coffin-looking thing from a medieval torture museum I went to once. The Iron Maiden. The lid hung open, countless long, needle-like blades poking inwards, threatened to poke a million new holes in him if it was shut. His situation was not lost on him. Where am I? What the hell is this? Oh, lucky guess, the host joked. More canned laughter. I know you always love watching those trivia shows, Malcolm. Were you always sitting there grinding your teeth, seething that it wasn't fair? That you should be the one up on stage winning big? The man paused. Even he seemed mesmerized by the unreal perfection of the host before him. This is a game show? All you have to do is answer a few questions. Think you can handle that, Malcolm? He pulled out a cue card without waiting for an answer. And our first question, what were you doing the night of February 18th, 1998? The man seemed baffled. Just sat on my couch watching the NFL, I think. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to remember. He let out a startled squeal as a horrid buzzer sounded. On cue, the lid slid a third of the way closed, making him flinch. Ooh, I'm afraid that's the wrong answer, Frank. But you know what? I'll give you one more chance. What were you... Following a girl home, the man cried out. From the bar. There, are you happy? Correct. The canned audience began cheering. Such honesty. Now, our second question. Just what were you carrying while you followed her? He hesitated for a little too long, and then the buzzer sounded again, and the lid slid so near to closing that its blades began poking uncomfortably against his skin. He tried to press himself against the back of the maiden as well as his restraints would allow. Jesus, okay, a knife! Ah, if only you'd said that just a second earlier. Another big question. Our third question. Why, Malcolm? Why did you do it? That set Malcolm off. He started thrashing, clawing, screaming. Let me out of this thing, you maniac! You can't do this to me! Do you know who I am? Is this some sort of sick joke? My lawyers will have your head for this, you... And then the buzzer. All of a sudden, the lid slammed shut, full force, and the man was utterly silenced, save for an unnatural, drawn-out wheeze. Another wrong answer, Malcolm. I'm afraid I was looking for, because if I can't have her, no one can. I admit it. I laughed. Out of shock more than anything. How was this allowed on TV? I took it to some sort of dark comedy show, and it was kind of satisfying to see that freaky character get his comeuppance. Still, there was something unnerving to me, seeing the man's eyes through the openings in the maiden, wide and red and terrified. They just looked a little... too real. But the maiden disappeared as quickly as it came, before I could dwell on it too much. Oh, envy! Definitely one of my favorite sins! More laughter. Stay tuned, folks. We've still got a night of fun and games in store for you. But first, how's about a word from our sponsors? Cut to a corporate logo, which I again couldn't recognize. This segment was made possible by Pure Health, which has recently announced a brilliant new initiative to protect our citizens from skin cancer by removing their skin completely. The camera cut to a massive industrial building, resembling a solid concrete cube around 50 meters in width and height. Its surface bore arcane symbols etched using carvings of wailing, tormented faces. The host would occasionally be rendered inaudible by a deafening metallic scraping from within, though he didn't seem to notice. The only protrusion from the building's cube shape was a single smokestack, belching a scarlet red smoke into the atmosphere. A queue of gaunt figures waited at the entrance, herded and coerced by their grim overseers. And there were no words to describe the procession of scarlet ghouls limping out of the building's other end. Owing to the non-linearity of time, the brand new grand skin peeling machine has spontaneously appeared several years before construction deadlines, and indeed, before it was even conceived of by anyone in our timeline. People have rushed all the way from Malibu just to try this miracle of technology out on opening day. And so far, the reviews have been stellar. He shoved his microphone in the face of a shambling thing that could only scarcely be called a human. Tatters of flesh clung to its exposed musculature, blowing in the wind. Its eyes were the only hint of color in the sea of bloody red, and they were wide, white, and terrified. The thing screamed and wailed for as long as it could before the last tendons connecting its jaw to its face snapped, and it was left to choke and gurgle. An amazing wail! The results speak for themselves, folks. The grand skin peeling machine is a hit. So far, I was still laughing along and having a good time. The sight of the next guest, however, started making me nervous. It was an old lady. She couldn't be a day younger than 60. The sort of sweet, elderly woman who, in a just world, would be cooking chocolate chip cookies for her grandchildren in a comfy cottage somewhere. But here she was, tied to a metal chair, eyes wide, shaking like a leaf. Unlike the last contestant, she seemed to know exactly what was happening. In exchange for our loving endorsement, they've agreed to loan us one of their star employees. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the Laquisma! Something slunk from the darkness far behind her. Or perhaps it'd be more apt to say that the darkness birthed it whole cloth. It was like a living shadow, and it took my eyes a moment to register what I was even seeing. How do I even begin describing this creature? I could say it looked almost human, or at least like something that may have been human long ago. Or I could start with its skin, which was all black and shiny as latex and seemingly smooth on first glance. But if you looked closer, you'd realize it was covered in a million tiny reptilian scales, almost like a shark. Its head was a bald man's, utterly devoid of any distinguishing features, like the basic stock template for a human being. It was notable only for a complete lack of pupils and irises. Its eyes a pure white. Its body defied basic biology in so many key ways. I had to stare at it for what felt like an eternity just to wrap my mind around its physiology. It was at least 5 or 6 meters long, by my estimate, composed of multiple human torsos stacked one on top of the other, like segments of a centipede, each melding with the ones around it at the waist and shoulders. Each torso sported a pair of short, stubby arms that propelled it with terrifying grace. It ended with a pair of human legs, perpetually bent on their knees, beneath a tail that looked more like its coccyx was poking free from its body. The old lass could clearly hear it, and kept futilely trying to turn her head around enough to get a peek at what stood behind her. My mouth uselessly. You don't want to know. Glad you could join us again, Miss Weathersby. Judging by our ratings last week, you seem to have been a fan favorite. Her voice was so soft, I could barely hear it below the static. Oh God, please, why won't you people let me go? I've told you, I've never done anything, never hurt anybody. There must be some sort of... He waved a hand over her, and it seemed to forcefully snap her mouth shut. Please, Miss Weathersby, save your breath for our questions. Another cue card. Your first question, my friend. Where did you and your husband buy your first home? She had to think about it for a long time. Eventually she cried out, Alabama, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Ding, ding, ding. Why, you're already doing better than our first contestant. Next question, what breed of dog was your childhood pet? She had a pained look on her face, as she thought. Eventually a timer started ticking down. It wasn't visible, so it wasn't clear how much time she had left exactly, but the sound it made got more shrill and high-pitched with every second. Miss Weathersby, need I remind you that we have a time limit on this show? A tear ran down her cheek. I keep telling you people, I don't know. I have dementia. I can't remember, please. The buzzer again. I'm afraid that was the wrong answer. Lacheesma? The old lady shuddered at the sounds of hundreds of feet drawing a little closer to her. Now, your first grandchild. What did he look like? What color were his eyes? His hair? She was crying harder now, like it hurt her that she couldn't remember something so dear to her. I told you, I can't remember. Why are you doing this to me? If you don't remember them, why would they remember you? The host mocked as the buzzer sounded, and the beast drew a little closer. Really, do you believe they still even think about you? Or do you think they're glad that the old bag of bones isn't there sucking up their inheritance? This went up for... God, it could have been an hour. I was glued to the screen all the while, frozen with terror, praying for this nightmare to just end. For her to make it out okay somehow. He pored over every little detail of the life she lived and the people she loved, delighting in how little of it she could still recall. And the thing grew closer and closer, until she finally felt multiple pairs of hands resting upon her shoulders. The thing was looming over her now, and a long black tongue, a few feet in length, emerged from its mouth and ran trails of dark saliva over the back of her head. She looked broken down, eyes raw from crying, and I could tell by the dampness of her dress that she'd wet herself. Now, Miss Weathersby, our time here has been fun, but I do believe it is time for our final question. Tell me, what is the name of your only son? She couldn't even answer anymore. She just stared ahead like her mind was a million miles away. He cackled as the buzzer sounded one final time and threw his cue cards aside. Thank you for playing, Miss Weathersby. Better luck next time. I would say the thing unhinged its jaw like a snake, but that'd be an understatement. The way the thing's face malformed and wrinkled and stretched as it opened its maw, it no longer looked even remotely human. Its jaws must have been parted at least 30 centimeters apart, revealing a second pharyngeal pair of jaws that lashed out and gripped the woman's skull, pulling her headlong into that darkness. I could hear bones crunching and snapping as its throat constricted down around her body, peristaltic muscles compacting her into a meat slurry, bit by bit. Yet she just wouldn't die. Even as her skull and upper body were already crushed and compacted, organs and muscles pressed into mulch, she still kicked her legs, twitched her fingers, let out a gurgling that must have been some attempt at screaming. She was squirming even as the beast snapped its jaw shut around the last of her, condemning her to whatever torments awaited her inside the creature. And all the while, that horrible laughter. Don't worry, folks, she'll be back next week, and the next, and the next. Needless to say, I wasn't having fun anymore. In fact, I had to turn away and fight the urge to throw up. I stood, about to turn the TV off and don't touch that dial now. I froze. There was something chilling about the way he said that, staring right into the screen as if reacting to what I was doing. I hated that grin on his face. The real show is just beginning. And with the barely restrained excitement of a child on Christmas morning, he yanked back another curtain, and I recognized everything. I recognized that crappy bootleg knockoff Always Sunny in Philadelphia jacket that was so gaudy and terrible it instantly became her favorite thing in her wardrobe. I recognized those subtle hints of slight acne she disguised as fake freckles. I recognized the way her gray eyes would remind me of those overcast mornings at the beach at Hilton Head and pointing out all the cannonball jellyfish washed up on the sands. I recognized that tattoo of the name Rocky. How I'd held her all night long as she cried into my shirt after her childhood cat had died. It was Lyla. I shuddered, gasped, fell from my seat as if I'd been punched in the stomach, and the air had been knocked out of me. I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be real. I was dreaming right now. I must be. I just had to wake up. But I couldn't wake up. Nothing I could do dispelled the sight of her curled up in that thing. That bronze statue of a bull, horns jutting out on either side of a head that roaring silently up at the heavens. all while the love of my life was locked in its hollowed-out belly, visible only through a pane of glass. I could hear her cry out in shock at where she'd found herself, and every whimper felt like it drove a knife through my chest. The host soaked in the moment. It was ecstasy for him, the suffering of it all. He stared dead into the camera like he was looking right at me as she called. "What is this? Where am I?" "Why, I have good news, my dear Lyla. You're exactly where every American dreams of being. You're on TV." He pointed to the camera. "And we have a very special guest in the audience tonight. Your very own beloved Jackson." I shuddered, hearing my own name ooze from his fetid lips. His facade of perfection was slipping, and there was something so profoundly ugly beneath it. Her eyes snapped to the camera, confused, despairing. "Jackson? Baby? Oh, what's happening? What is this?" I don't know, I thought, gripping the sides of the TV so hard my knuckles turned white. "But I'm going to get you out of there, baby. I'm going to find whoever did this, and I'm going to bury them all so far beneath that studio that they'll never..." "I'm afraid Jackson hasn't joined us quite yet, my dear. But if you truly love him, surely you'll give him a show to remember, won't you?" He taunted her. "All I want, after all, is to ask you a few questions. In fact, I'll offer you a special deal. Get even a single answer right, and I'll let you go free. But get one wrong, and, well..." On cue, a fire was lit beneath her. Small, smoldering for now. But she whimpered as she noticed the heat. We both realized in that instant what this was. By now, I was screaming things I can't repeat here, and slamming my hands against the TV screen as if I could reach through and save her. She bit her lip and acquiesced. Not like she had any room to argue. The host grinned and readied a cue card. "Your first question. Where are you, Lyla?" I don't know. How am I supposed to know?" "You do know, Lyla. You know exactly where you are." He smirked at her. "Here's a free hint. What's the last thing you remember before you woke up here?" She thought about it and choked back a sob, shaking as the realization slowly settled in. "But why? The horrible wail of the buzzer cut her off. "Oh, too bad. I'm afraid you've run out of time." Seemingly as if on its own, the fire doubled in size. Sparks licked the belly of the bronze bowl and began to ever so slowly heat the surface. She pawed around in the tight confines, searching for any reprieve from the scalding heat all around her as the metal grew hot like it had been left out in the sun on a summer's day. "Please, oh God, let me out of this thing. It hurts. It hurts." The host seemed to breathe in her pain, as if stealing a moment's indulgence. "Now that there is no doubt about where you are, my dear, let us proceed to the second question." He switched to his next card. "Did you believe in God, in the end?" "Of course." She pled her case as if she was being tried in court. "My entire life. Every day I gave to the poor, helped the sick, did whatever I could to honor..." "I'm afraid you misunderstood my question. I asked, did you believe in him at the end? The very moment your pitiful little life was snuffed out." "I always believed I'd never forsake him." Yes, I know. You lived a good and holy life, didn't you?" He cackled. "But what of the very end? You and your little husband were so excited to deliver your first little baby boy. But oh, tragedy. It all went wrong, didn't it? Your precious little boy didn't make it through childbirth, and you followed closely behind. That whole business with the botched pregnancy, it was, what do you call it? Yes, a test of faith. And I'm afraid you failed. In your final moments, you watched the light fade from your child's eyes, and you assumed, wisely, in my humble opinion, that no kind and loving God would allow something like that to happen." He laughed. "Funny how after a lifetime of dutiful service, all it takes is one little mistake at the end to bring you here. To us." I'd never seen such depths of despair in a person's eyes. Such emptiness. Like with every word, he'd been scooping out another piece of her until she was hollow. And then that buzzer roared again. More shrill than ever. And I could barely see her little window through the smoke and flames. The belly of the bull was turning orange in places, and I could hear her flesh start to sizzle like meat on a grill. There are no words for the noises she made. No words at all. And our last final question, he continued. What were your last words to your poor, beloved Jackson? I love you, I called out the answer. Bloody fingerprints stained the TV screen from my slamming my hands against it as I screamed the answer over and over. I love you! I love you! I love you! At some point, I forgot that there was ever a question. I was just screaming it at her, as if hoping that she could hear it, that it could bring her a modicum of comfort in that place. The buzzer sounded again. I couldn't bring myself to look. All I could hear was the roaring of the bull and the steam rising from its bronze nostrils. The curtain fell. Silence drowned the sound. The host dropped all pretense that he hadn't been speaking directly to me. Now, Jackson, you just might be one of my new favorite audience members this show had ever had. I know this must have been hard for you. But if you'll just stay tuned, I have one more show I know you're certain to love. I didn't bother to touch the remote. After all, nothing could be worse than what I'd just seen. Right? Wrong. Horror racked me as the curtain rose, and I saw the man chained to a chair. I pulled away like a caveman witnessing fire, cringing and stuttering, face wet with sweat. It was the sort of fear that worked its way into your bones like a bad chill, that left you shaking, teeth chattering. It was me. An older me, sure, but not by much. 10 years, maybe? A gaunt and hollow version of me, one twisted by 10 years of depression and hard drugs. But it was unmistakable. His eyes widened as he recognized the host. Oh, God. God, please no. It can't be. Oh, Christ, let me out of this chair, you come now. We wouldn't want to use the Lord's name in vain, would we? I mean, that would be a sin. The host laid a hand on the other me's shoulder. It may have been a few years since you watched our program, but I'm sure you remember the rules, don't you, old friend? The other me was wordless, on the verge of hyperventilating, just as I was. The host was giddy with delight. Now, our first and only question is one I'm sure our viewer will be very interested in. What sins, exactly, do you think landed you here? The other me tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. I could see it in his eyes. The years of self-destruction, the bitter hopelessness, the whirlpool of nihilism and vice and decay, the suffocating depths of a man, the darkness. How could he put it into words? The sound of the buzzer was like a pig's squeal. I'm afraid that our viewer is going to have to figure that one out for himself. In the meantime, your punishment. Well, we wouldn't want to spoil anything. The curtain slowly began to fall, just as a couple other of those black, grotesque monstrosities emerged from the darkness. The curtain covered them all before I could get a good look at their obscene, twisted, asymmetrical figures. All I could hear was the crunching, the sound of skin tearing like paper, the screaming that went on for longer and louder than a human throat or vocal cords could endure. The image and audio were beginning to distort, glitch, burn away. The tapes were physically melting as they played. My VCR was starting to overheat, sparks pouring from its front panel. The host's voice jumped around in tone, his voice fading into the static blur as the tapes bubbled and boiled and distorted. But my friends, I'm afraid that concludes tonight's episode of our show. So with a final farewell to our dear beloved viewer, Jackson. Just before the image melted away, the camera seemed to jump forward until his face filled the screen, his eyes piercing into mine as he cackled in that sing-song voice. See you soon. And that was, I found an old recording of the most gruesome TV show ever broadcast by No Mass 39. It's quite obvious, based on the context clues we get out of the story, that this is clearly hell or some kind of purgatory situation going on. Most likely hell. And it's interesting because it's not just all fire and brimstone. I'm sure there's an element of that somewhere, but this is it's a studio show kind of set up, potentially run by Lucifer himself, which is probably why he's like the perfect thing, being, whatever, because, Lucifer's a fallen angel and they're supposed to be like the embodiment of perfection, blah, 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 blah. But it really kind of reminds you of just how like dark and twisted that kind of a mindset could be. And I think what else is really interesting is the fact that no matter what kind of a life you lead, it's clear that even one remote second of a sin, whether it be disbelief in God or anything else, really, can that's it. You're going to hell, like no issue. I mean, the fact that Lyla was a great example. She was always a good person. She always believed in God. She did all kinds of really good stuff. But then it was at the last moments of her life is when she kind of believed that, okay, maybe God isn't real. Maybe he's, why would a benevolent God, do all these horrific things? So clearly that was enough to still get her sent to the place. Maybe it's a defamation of God kind of thing. Maybe that's like the ultimate sin. I don't really know. I don't know how all that works. Not exactly said. But I like the fact that this is it's a great story. It's quite a lot of fun. It's got elements of like digital restoration. I think that's really interesting. I've always found that kind of stuff to be awesome because you get to see real cool glimpses into the past of like lost media and stuff. I think that's great, and makes me think of shows like Archive 81 or what was the film? God, Insidious? Is that the one I'm thinking of? Insidious? No, it's not Insidious. It's oh man, can't believe I forget the name of it right now. But he gets these. It's Bagul, and he's got the he lives in the murder house, and he's a writer, and oh my god, it was so good. But yes, it's similar kind of stuff where basically you find things that are lost to time, and you restore them. Really cool. Anyway, let me stop rambling. I really enjoyed the story. I really, really did. I love a comical, goofy, evil character. I've always enjoyed that kind of a shtick. I think that's great. It's been a super great story. I'm really glad I got to share this with all of you, and let me know what else you want to see. Thank you so much. This has been Nate at Night. We'll see you next time. Take care. Thank you so much to my YouTube members and Patreon members for all the love and support. It's thanks to people like you that we can keep growing.